The notification sound from Linda Martinez's phone pierced through the quiet of her small Denver apartment at 11:47 p.m. She'd been folding laundry on her worn couch, the same ritual she'd performed countless times over the past 28 years of single motherhood. The apartment was modest but clean, filled with the scent of lavender fabric softener and the lingering aroma of homemade chicken soup she'd made earlier, that dineth for leftovers she'd planned to send home with Marcus when he visited this weekend at 52. Linda's hands showed the evidence of 2 decades working double shifts at Mountain View Medical Center. First as a janitor scrubbing floors at 3 a.m., then slowly climbing to her current position as a patient coordinator. The promotion had taken her 15 years to achieve, earned through night school classes she'd attended while Marcus slept, studying medical terminology and healthcare administration by lamplight at her small kitchen table. Her fingertips were permanently calloused from years of cleaning supplies and paperwork. But she'd painted her nails a cheerful pink that morning, a small luxury she allowed herself every Sunday. The same pink polish Marcus had picked out for her when he was 7, insisting it matched her favorite sweater. At Marcus M_official just went live, the notification read. Linda's heart skipped. Marcus rarely went live anymore since his tech startup had taken off. Her 28-year-old son had built something called a social media management platform that she didn't fully understand. But she knew it was successful because he'd moved into that expensive downtown loft and drove a Tesla now. She was proud, even if they'd grown distant since his success. She clicked the notification, expecting to see him talking about his business or maybe announcing some new achievement. Instead, she found herself staring at her son sitting in what looked like a sleek podcast studio, speaking to someone off camera. "Man, I really came from nothing," Marcus was saying, his voice carrying that confident tone he'd developed over the past few years. Like, absolutely nothing. No help, no connections, no safety net. Just pure hustle and determination. Linda felt her chest tighten, but she kept listening. She adjusted her position on the couch, accidentally knocking over the small bowl of popcorn she'd been snacking on, the kernels scattered across her coffee table, mixing with the sorted socks and t-shirts she'd been organizing Marcus's laundry from his last visit, which she'd volunteered to wash because his building's machines are so expensive. I remember eating ramen noodles for weeks because that's all we could afford. Living in this tiny apartment with roaches. My mom worked some dead-end job, but honestly, she wasn't really present, you know? I had to figure everything out myself. Nobody taught me about business, about networking, about building wealth. I literally started from zero. Linda's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Roaches. They'd had a brief ant problem one summer when Marcus was 12, and she'd called an exterminator the same day, using money from her grocery budget and ramen noodles. Yes, they'd eaten plenty of inexpensive meals, but she'd always found ways to make them nutritious and filling, nodding frozen vegetables she bought in bulk, serving them with the homemade bread she baked every week to save money. Dead-end job, she whispered to her empty living room. She looked around at the medical certificates on her wall, the employee recognition awards from the hospital, the framed photo of her receiving her associate's degree in healthcare administration earned when Marcus was 22. After she'd finally had time to finish her own education, the laundry basket slipped from Linda's lap, clean clothes scattering across the floor. The thing is, Marcus continued, warming to his theme, when you truly come from nothing, when you have to claw your way up from rock bottom with zero support, it makes you hungrier. It makes you appreciate success more. I see these kids whose parents handed them everything and they just don't have that fire. Linda's hands were shaking now. She watched her son, the boy she'd raised alone after his father, walked out when he was 3 to describe a childhood that bore no resemblance to the reality she remembered. "Did your mother ever support your entrepreneurial dreams?" the interviewer asked. Marcus laughed, and the sound felt like a knife. "Support. Look, my mom did her best, but she had a poverty mindset, you know. She was always scared, always worried about money. She couldn't see beyond just surviving. When I told her I wanted to start a business instead of getting a safe job, she thought I was crazy. I had to block out all that negativity and believe in myself." Linda stood up abruptly, her phone clattering to the floor. The small living room felt suffocating. She looked around at the modest furniture she'd saved for months to buy, at the framed photos of Marcus's graduations and achievements that covered nearly every surface, at the shelf holding his childhood books she'd bought instead of buying herself new clothes, the Harry Potter series she'd purchased 1 volume at a time over 6 months when he was 10, the complete set of Calvin and Hobbes she'd found at a garage sale and surprised him with on his 13th birthday, the college textbooks she'd helped him buy, sometimes using her credit card when his financial aid didn't cover everything. The walls were painted a warm yellow, a color Marcus had chosen when he was 15. It makes the place feel bigger, Mom, he'd said, and she'd agreed, even though she'd preferred the sage green. They'd painted it together on a weekend, getting more paint on themselves than the walls, laughing until their sides hurt when she'd accidentally painted a stripe across her own cheek. Now, those yellow walls felt like they were closing in on her. She picked up her phone with trembling fingers. The live stream had over 50,000 viewers, and the comments were pouring in. Respect for the self-made grind. This is why I love your story, Marcus. Pure inspiration. Coming from nothing makes the success so much sweeter. Your mom sounds like she held you back. Good thing you didn't listen. Finally, someone who doesn't make excuses about their upbringing. This is what real hustle looks like. No handouts. No help, proof that you can overcome toxic family dynamics. Linda's vision blurred as she read comment after comment, celebrating her son's fabricated struggle. Strangers were applauding him for overcoming the very support system that had made his success possible. They were cheering for a victim who had never existed, while the real story, the story of a mother's love and sacrifice, was being buried under lies. She thought about the nights she'd stayed up helping him with homework after working shifts, her eyes burning from exhaustion but refusing to let him struggle alone. The times she'd gone without meals so he could have lunch money, telling him she'd already eaten when her stomach was empty and growling. The way she'd worked Christmas Eve every year for the overtime pay so she could buy him the Nintendo he wanted, the basketball shoes that cost more than her monthly grocery budget, the laptop for college that she'd researched for weeks to find the best deal. She remembered the phone call she'd made to her supervisor, begging for extra shifts when Marcus needed money for his senior class trip to Washington, D.C. All the other kids are going, Mom, he'd said, his voice heavy with disappointment. She'd worked 7 straight days without a break, her feet swollen and aching. But she'd made it happen because seeing his face light up when she told him he could go had been worth every hour of pain. She remembered driving her beat-up Honda Civic to 3 different stores to find the specific brand of notebooks he needed for his senior year project, the ones that cost twice as much as regular notebooks but were required by his teacher. She'd found them at the 3rd store, bought them with change she'd been saving in a coffee can, and never mentioned the extra time and effort it had taken. She remembered taking out a loan she couldn't afford so he could attend the state university, instead of community college, signing papers that would keep her in debt for years because his guidance counselor had said he had real potential and deserved the opportunity. She'd never told Marcus about the loan. She'd just smiled when he got his acceptance letter and told him how proud she was. She remembered the pride in his eyes when he graduated, and how he'd thanked her in his speech. None of this would have been possible without my mom's sacrifice. She worked multiple jobs, went without things she needed, and never once complained. She taught me that hard work and love can overcome anything. That boy seemed like a stranger now. The man on her phone screen confidently telling his inspiring story to thousands of viewers bore no resemblance to the son who had once written her Mother's Day cards saying, "You are my hero." In his careful 3rd grade handwriting, the comments kept coming. Self-made millionaire at 28. Living proof that excuses are just excuses. I needed to hear this. My parents always doubt my dreams too. When your own family doesn't believe in you, you have to believe in yourself. Linda felt something fracture inside her chest. 25. Years of sacrifice, of choosing his needs over her own, of celebrating every small victory and supporting him through every failure. All of it erased with a few casual sentences to strangers on the internet. She walked to her bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the photo on her nightstand. It was from Marcus's college graduation, both of them smiling, his arm around her shoulders. "Thanks for everything, Mom," he'd written on the back. "I couldn't have done this without you." Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Carol. "Did you see Marcus's interview? Girl, I am heated. That boy has lost his damn mind." Then another from her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. "Linda, honey, I saw some video online. Are you okay?" And another from her coworker Janet. "I can't believe what I just watched." That ungrateful little Linda turned off her phone. She couldn't bear to read anymore. She walked to her kitchen, the same kitchen where she'd packed Marcus's lunches every morning for 12 years, where she'd helped him build his first science fair project, where she'd sat with him at the small table going over college applications. The walls were covered with his achievements, honor roll certificates, basketball team photos, his high school diploma, his college degree. The refrigerator was still covered with photos spanning from his toddler years to recent holidays. In every single one where they were together, she was beaming with pride. In the recent ones, he looked increasingly distant, checking his phone or glancing away from the camera, Linda poured herself a glass of water with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She'd raised a son who had just publicly humiliated her in front of tens of thousands of people. Worse, he'd rewritten their entire history to serve his personal brand. But what hurt most wasn't the lies. It was the casual dismissal of her love, her sacrifice, her very existence in his story. In Marcus's narrative, she was either absent or actively harmful, a woman with a poverty mindset who provided no support for his dreams. She thought about calling him, demanding an explanation, but something held her back. A growing seed of anger that felt unfamiliar and powerful. If Marcus wanted to claim he came from nothing, if he wanted to erase her role in his success, maybe it was time to show him what nothing actually looked like. Linda had spent 28 years putting her son first. Maybe it was time to put herself first for once. She walked back to the living room and looked at all those photos of Marcus, all those proud moments she'd documented and displayed like a shrine to their relationship. Tomorrow, she decided, things were going to change. The boy who'd just told the world he raised himself was about to learn what it really meant to be on his own. 3 days had passed since Marcus's viral interview, and Linda had made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. She'd spent those 3 days in a strange kind of mourning, not for Marcus himself, but for the version of their relationship she'd believed existed. She'd watched the video 3 more times, taking notes. Each viewing revealed new wounds. The way he'd laughed when describing her poverty mindset. How he'd emphasized that he'd received absolutely zero support. The casual dismissal of her very existence in his success story. The video had gained over 200,000 views. The comments section had become a celebration of Marcus's self-made journey, with hundreds of people sharing their own stories of overcoming unsupportive families. Linda had become a cautionary tale in her own son's story, the negative force he'd heroically overcome. But what struck her most was how comfortable he'd looked, telling these lies. This wasn't a slip of the tongue or a momentary lapse in judgment. He'd crafted this narrative deliberately, probably told it many times before. Linda sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a yellow legal pad, making lists. The morning sunlight streamed through her small window, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air, the same window where she'd hung Marcus's childhood artwork for years, taking it down only when he'd become embarrassed by it in high school. On one page, she wrote down every monthly expense that went toward supporting Marcus: his car insurance, $180. His phone bill, $85, his health insurance, $320, the storage unit for his college furniture, $95, his gym membership, $45, his Netflix and Spotify subscriptions, $25, the premium pet insurance for his dog, $60, his Amazon Prime account, $15, his parking pass for downtown events, $40, the premium gas she put in his car when he visited, $50, and at least 12 other items she'd never really added up before. The total was $1,247 per month, nearly half her take-home pay from the hospital. Linda stared at the number, feeling a mixture of shock and anger. She'd been subsidizing a grown man's lifestyle to the tune of almost $15,000 a year, while he told the world he was completely self-sufficient. On another page, she listed all the ways she still actively supported him: doing his laundry when he visited every other weekend, keeping his favorite foods stocked in her fridge, Gatorade, Greek yogurt, the expensive organic bread he preferred, maintaining his childhood bedroom exactly as he'd left it, complete with his high school basketball trophies and college textbooks, providing free babysitting for his dog when he traveled at least twice a month, serving as his emergency contact for everything from his dentist to his bank, keeping spare keys to his apartment for emergencies, and being available for his random phone calls at all hours when he needed advice or just wanted to vent about work stress. On a third page, she wrote down all the emotional labor, the weekly check-in calls she initiated every Sunday at 7 p.m., a tradition she'd started when he went to college. The birthday and holiday gifts she selected and purchased, always something thoughtful and personal. Never just gift cards. The family events she organized and hosted every holiday dinner, every celebration, the careful management of her own needs to accommodate his schedule and preferences. Rearranging her work shifts when he wanted to visit, choosing restaurants based on his dietary restrictions, watching movies he wanted to see even when she preferred something else. Looking at these lists, Linda realized she'd been subsidizing an adult man's life while he publicly claimed to be entirely self-sufficient. More than that, she'd been performing the invisible labor that made his independence possible, while he took credit for achieving it all on his own. Her phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen for the first time in 28 years. Linda let her son's call go to voicemail. 10 minutes later, she listened to the message. "Hey Mom, just calling to check in. I've got some exciting news about a potential investor meeting. Call me back when you get this." His voice was cheerful, casual. No acknowledgement of the interview. No awareness that anything had changed. Linda deleted the voicemail without returning the call that afternoon. She drove to Marcus's insurance company and removed him from her auto policy. She called Verizon and took him off her family plan. She contacted her HR department and dropped him from her health insurance. Each phone call felt like cutting another cord that had bound her to a son who'd already cut himself free. The customer service representatives were helpful and professional. No one asked why a 52-year-old woman was removing her adult son from her accounts. It was a normal thing to do. Linda realized she should have done it years ago. Next, she drove to Marcus's expensive downtown loft. The building had a doorman and marble floors, a far cry from the tiny apartment with roaches he'd described in his interview. She used her key to enter his unit, a key he'd given her for emergencies. The space was beautiful. Floor-to-ceiling windows, modern furniture, a kitchen with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. Linda walked through it slowly, taking inventory. In his laundry room, she found 3 loads of dirty clothes he'd been planning to bring to her apartment this weekend. She left them where they were, in his refrigerator. She found a container of her homemade enchiladas and a bag of his favorite cookies she'd baked last week. She threw them away. His bedroom closet contained a full wardrobe of expensive clothes, alongside several items she'd bought him over the years. The cashmere sweater from last Christmas, the dress shirts she'd given him for job interviews, the leather jacket from his 25th birthday. Linda took only the items she'd purchased. Everything else she left undisturbed. In his home office, she found something that made her pause. A framed photo of them together from his college graduation, sitting prominently on his desk, the same photo she had on her nightstand. For a moment, her resolve wavered. Then she remembered his words. She wasn't really present, you know. I had to figure everything out myself. Linda took the photo. On his kitchen counter, she left a single item, his spare key to her apartment. Her phone buzzed with a text as she drove home. Mom, tried calling earlier. Want to grab dinner this week? I have so much to tell you about the business. Linda turned off her phone. That evening, she did something she hadn't done in years. She called her sister Carol. I was wondering when you'd call, Carol said immediately. I've been worried sick since I saw that video. I need to tell you something, Linda said. I'm done. Done with what? Done being erased? Done being rewritten? Done subsidizing a grown man who tells the world he raised himself? Carol was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do? I'm going to show him what nothing actually looks like. Linda explained her plan. Carol listened without interruption. You sure about this? Carol asked finally. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Good, Carol said firmly. It's about damn time. After they hung up, Linda walked through her apartment, really seeing it for the first time in months, without Marcus's presence looming over. Everything: his laundry to be done, his calls to be answered, his needs to be anticipated. The space felt different, lighter. Somehow, she poured herself a glass of wine and sat on her couch, looking at the wall of Marcus's photos and achievements. Tomorrow, she decided she would take them down. Not out of anger, but because this apartment was her home. Not a shrine to someone who'd publicly disowned her. Her phone, still turned off, sat silently on the coffee table. For the first time in years, Linda went to bed without checking for messages from her son. Marcus had wanted to be self-made. He'd told the world he'd come from nothing and received no support. Starting now, that story would finally be true. 2 weeks had passed, and Marcus was beginning to panic. He sat in his downtown loft at 2 a.m., staring at his phone. His mother hadn't answered a call or returned a text in 14 days. Her phone went straight to voicemail now, and her voicemail box was full at first. He'd assumed she was busy or maybe sick, but when he'd driven to her apartment building, Mrs. Patterson had informed him that his mother was just fine. Thank you very much, and that she'd asked not to be disturbed. What do you mean, not to be disturbed? Marcus had asked, Mrs. Patterson had given him a look that could have frozen water. I mean, exactly what I said, young man. Your mother is taking some time for herself. The way she'd said young man carried the kind of disapproval usually reserved for particularly bratty children. Marcus had tried using his key to enter his mother's apartment, only to discover the locks had been changed. That's when the real panic set in. He'd called his Aunt Carol, who'd answered on the first ring with a tone he'd never heard before. What do you want, Marcus? I can't reach Mom. Is she okay? I'm really worried, are you now? Carol's voice was ice cold. Worried about the woman with the poverty mindset who was never really present. The one who provided you with absolutely zero support? Marcus felt his stomach drop. You saw the interview? Carol had never spoken to him like that, ever. Aunt Carol? I can explain. Explain what? How you lied about your entire childhood for internet points? How you threw the woman who sacrificed everything for you under the bus for your personal brand? It wasn't like that then. What was it like, Marcus? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you decided your actual story wasn't good enough for your image, so you invented a new one. And in your new story, the woman who worked 16-hour shifts to pay for your college doesn't exist. The line went dead. Marcus set his phone down with shaking hands. He'd tried to rationalize his mother's silence in a dozen different ways, but deep down he knew. She'd seen the interview. He opened his laptop and pulled up the video. It had over 400,000 views now and had been shared across multiple platforms. The comment section had grown into a celebration of self-made success stories, with his interview being held up as inspiration for overcoming toxic family dynamics. Watching it now, Marcus began to see what his mother must have seen, what his aunt had seen. What? Apparently, half of Denver had seen he'd erased her? Completely. The successful entrepreneur telling his inspiring story had systematically removed every trace of Linda Martinez from his narrative. In his version of events, he was a victim, who'd overcome his circumstances through pure willpower. His mother was either absent or actively harmful, a minor character in his story who'd provided nothing but obstacles to overcome. Marcus closed the laptop and walked to his kitchen, looking for something to eat. His refrigerator was nearly empty. For the past 2 weeks, he'd been living on takeout and restaurant meals because he'd grown accustomed to his mother keeping his fridge stocked with home-cooked meals and his favorite snacks. He opened his phone to order delivery, then stopped. His credit card had been declined twice this week. He'd assumed it was a technical error. But now he pulled up his banking app to check out his auto insurance payment had bounced. His phone bill was overdue. His health insurance premium had been returned for insufficient funds. Marcus stared at the screen in confusion. His business account had plenty of money, but all his personal bills were set up to auto-pay from his personal checking account, an account that his mother had been quietly subsidizing for years. He'd never realized how much she'd been covering, because he'd never had to think about it. When he'd moved into this expensive loft, he'd calculated the rent and utilities. But somehow, the insurance payments, phone bills, and various subscriptions had remained invisible expenses that simply got paid. His phone buzzed with a notification. His car insurance had been canceled for non-payment. Marcus called the insurance company, expecting to quickly resolve what must be a mistake. "I'm showing that you were removed from your mother's policy 2 weeks ago," the customer service representative explained. "You'll need to establish your own policy removed." "I never asked to be removed. The primary account holder, Linda Martinez, removed you from the policy on October 15th. Marcus hung up and called Verizon. "You were removed from the family plan on October 15th, they told him. "You'll need to establish individual service." He called his health insurance. Same story. October 15th, Linda Martinez had removed him from all her accounts. Marcus sat in his expensive loft, surrounded by his expensive furniture, and realized he had no idea how much his basic monthly expenses actually cost. He'd been living like an independent adult while his mother quietly subsidized his independence. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the growing realization of what else he'd lost. His laundry had been piling up for 2 weeks because he'd always taken it to his mother's apartment. His dog, Rex, was at a kennel costing $80 per day because his mother usually watched him when Marcus traveled for business. He'd been eating expensive restaurant meals because he'd grown accustomed to his mother's cooking and had never learned to meal prep for himself. Marcus pulled out a calculator and began adding up numbers. The insurance payments, phone bills, pet costs, food expenses, and dozen other things his mother had been handling. It came to over $1,200 per month. Money that had simply disappeared from his budget without him noticing because someone else had been covering it. But the financial impact was nothing compared to the growing emotional realization of what he'd done. He walked to his home office and looked at his desk. The framed graduation photo was gone. His mother had been in his apartment and taken it. The thought of her quietly walking through his space, seeing his success, and removing the one trace of herself from his environment felt like a punch to the gut. Marcus opened his laptop and began typing an email. "Mom, I know you're upset about the interview. I can explain. It wasn't personal. I was just trying to connect with the audience. You know how these podcast things work. You have to tell a compelling story. I didn't mean anything by it. Can we please talk?" He stared at the email for 10 minutes, then deleted it. He tried again. "Mom, I'm sorry if the interview upset you. I never meant to hurt your feelings. You know how much I love and appreciate you. The podcast was just business. Can we please work this out?" Delete. "Mom, I fucked up. I know I fucked up. Please call me back." Delete. Marcus realized he didn't know how to apologize for erasing someone's entire existence. He didn't know how to take back words that hundreds of thousands of people had already heard. He didn't know how to explain that he'd sacrificed their relationship for the approval of strangers. His phone rang. For a moment, his heart jumped, thinking it might be his mother. It was a number he didn't recognize. Marcus Martinez? Yes. This is Denver Health Medical Center. You're listed as the emergency contact for Linda Martinez? She's been brought to our emergency room. The world stopped. What happened? Is she okay? She was in a car accident. She's stable, but she's asking for you. Marcus was already grabbing his keys. I'm on my way. As he ran to his car, one thought echoed in his mind. What if it was too late? What if the last conversation they'd ever had was him telling the world she'd never supported him? What if she died believing he didn't love her? The fluorescent lights in the Denver Health Medical Center emergency room cast everything in harsh, unforgiving clarity. Marcus had been sitting in the same plastic chair for 3 hours. His expensive clothes wrinkled, his carefully styled hair disheveled from running his hands through it. The antiseptic smell of the hospital brought back memories of visiting his mother at work when he was young, how proud he'd been to tell people his mom worked at the big hospital and helped sick people feel better. The irony wasn't lost on him, that he was now sitting in the same hospital where his mother had worked, double shifts to support his dreams, waiting to see if she would forgive him for destroying hers. Linda wasn't in a car accident. That had been a lie told by Carol, who'd called the hospital pretending to be a nurse. She'd wanted to see if her nephew would show up for his mother when he thought she was truly in danger. Carol had emerged from the hospital administration office 30 minutes after Marcus arrived, her expression unreadable. She was Linda's younger sister by 4 years, but she'd always seemed older, more serious, more direct. Where Linda was gentle and nurturing, Carol was fierce and protective. Growing up, Marcus had been slightly afraid of his aunt, but he'd also known she would defend him against anyone who tried to hurt him. Now it seemed like she might be the one trying to hurt him. "Hello, Marcus," she'd said, her voice carefully. "Neutral Aunt Carol. Thank God you're here. Is Mom okay?" They said she was in an accident. She wasn't in an accident. Carol's words were clipped matter of fact. "What? But the hospital called me. They said, I called you. I lied. Your mother is fine, physically speaking." Marcus stared at her, confused and relieved and angry all at once. "You lied? Why would you lie about something like that?" I was terrified. I thought she was dying. I drove here breaking every speed limit. I needed to know if there was anything left of the boy I helped raise. Carol interrupted. The boy who used to cry when he accidentally stepped on ants? The boy who saved his allowance to buy his mother flowers for her birthday? The boy who once told me that when he grew up, he was going to buy his mom a house with a big garden so she could grow all the vegetables she wanted. Marcus felt tears prick at his eyes. He remembered that conversation. He'd been 8 years old, and they'd been visiting Carol's house for Easter. Linda had been admiring Carol's flower garden, mentioning wistfully that she'd always wanted space to grow tomatoes and herbs. That boy wouldn't have erased his mother from his success story for internet fame, Carol continued. So I needed to see if he was still in there somewhere. "Is she really okay?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Physically, she's fine. Emotionally, that's up to you." Now Marcus sat in the waiting room while Linda decided whether or not to see him. Carol had explained the deception with no apology, her arms crossed and her expression stern. "Is she really okay?" Marcus had asked, his voice hoarse from panic. "Physically, she's fine. Emotionally, that's up to you." Now Carol emerged from the hospital room where Linda was waiting. "She see you," Carol said. "But Marcus, this might be your only chance. Don't waste it." Marcus stood on unsteady legs and walked down the hallway. Room 237, he knocked softly. "Come in." Linda was sitting in the hospital bed wearing a hospital gown that Carol had procured for the charade. She looked smaller than Marcus remembered. Older somehow. But her eyes were clear and direct as they met his. Double quotes. "Hello, Marcus. Mom, I was so scared. When they called and said you were hurt." "I'm not hurt," Linda said quietly. "Well, not in the way you mean." Marcus pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. "I know you saw the interview." "I did. I can explain. Can you?" Linda's voice was calm, but there was something underneath it that Marcus had never heard before. Something final. "Can you explain how you forgot that I worked double shifts at this very hospital for 15 years so you could have health insurance? Can you explain how you forgot about the times I went without dinner so you could have lunch money?" Marcus opened his mouth, but Linda continued. "Can you explain how you forgot about the night you called me crying because you'd failed your first midterm at college, and I drove 4 hours in a snowstorm to bring you homemade soup and help you study? Or the time you started your first business, the lawn care service, when you were 16 and I lent you money for equipment and spent my weekends helping you distribute flyers? Each word felt like a physical blow. Marcus remembered all of these things. He'd just pushed them aside to create a cleaner narrative. Can you explain how you forgot that when you wanted to start your tech company? I took out a loan against my retirement savings to help with your startup costs. $25,000. Marcus. I'll be paying that loan until I'm 68 years old. Marcus felt like he couldn't breathe. Mom, can you explain how you forgot that last Christmas when you were stressed about the business? I spent 3 days cooking your favorite meals and organizing a family gathering to cheer you up? Or how just last month when you were sick with the flu, I took time off work to take care of you? Linda's voice remained steady, but tears were flowing down her cheeks now. Can you explain how all of that 28 years of love and sacrifice and support became absolutely nothing in your story? How I became someone who wasn't really present? How my love became a poverty mindset that you had to overcome? Marcus was crying now too. I don't know. I don't know why I said those things. I do, Linda said. You said them because my real story didn't fit the image you wanted to project. A successful entrepreneur who overcame poverty and neglect sounds more inspiring than a successful entrepreneur whose single mother sacrificed everything to help him succeed. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand. You said them because it's easier to be a self-made success story than to admit you had help. Because acknowledging my role in your success would mean acknowledging that you owe someone something, and debt doesn't fit the image of the independent, self-sufficient businessman. Marcus wanted to argue, to defend himself, but every word she spoke rang true. I've spent the last 2 weeks thinking about this, Linda continued, about how I raised a son who could look into a camera and erase me from his life story, and I realized something. I failed you. No, Mom, you didn't fail me. You gave me everything. I failed you, Linda repeated firmly, because I taught you that my love came without conditions. I taught you that my support would always be there no matter how you treated me. I taught you that you could take and take and take without ever giving back, because that's what mothers do. She looked directly at him. I taught you that my needs didn't matter, that my feelings didn't matter, that I existed solely to serve your success. And when you became successful, you learned that you didn't need me anymore. So you rewrote the story to make me disappear. Marcus was sobbing now. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mom. I love you. I know I screwed up, but I love you too, Linda said. But love isn't enough anymore. She reached into the bedside table and pulled out a manila envelope. What's this? It's an itemized list of everything I've spent on you over the past 5 years. Everything from insurance payments to groceries to birthday gifts to dog sitting fees. It comes to $47,000. Marcus stared at the papers. I don't want you to pay me back, Linda said. I want you to understand what nothing actually costs. I want you to see, in black and white, what you called zero support. She handed him another envelope. This one contains copies of every text message, email, and voicemail where I supported your business dreams. Every time I encouraged you, every time I celebrated your victories, every time I helped you through failures. I printed them all out. There are 247 pages. Marcus's hands were shaking as he held the evidence of his mother's love. And this, Linda said, handing him a third envelope, contains a letter I've written to you. But before you read it, I need to know something, anything. Do you want to know why I really called you here? Marcus nodded. Because I needed to look at you and see if there was any part of the son I raised left inside the man you've become. I needed to know if the boy who used to tell me I was his hero was still in there somewhere. She studied his face. The boy who used to draw me pictures and leave them on my pillow with notes that said best mom ever. The boy who insisted on walking me to my car after my night shifts because he worried about me being alone in the dark. The boy who told me every Mother's Day that he was going to take care of me when he grew up, the way I took care of him. Marcus was crying so hard he could barely speak. He's still here, Mom. That boy is still here. Then prove it, Linda said. Because words are easy, Marcus. You've become very good with words, but actions are what matter. She stood up from the hospital bed and began removing the hospital gown, revealing her regular clothes underneath. The interview has been seen by 500,000 people now. Your lies about me, about our relationship, about your childhood, they're out there forever. People are using your story to justify cutting off their own families, believing that anyone who doesn't understand their dreams is holding them back. Linda looked at him directly. If you want to be my son, again really be my son, not just someone who shares my DNA, then you need to tell the truth. Publicly, the same way you told the lies? What do you mean? I mean, you need to go back on that podcast or find another platform just as big and tell people the real story. You need to admit that you lied, explain why you lied, and give credit where credit is due. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Mom, that would ruin my reputation. My business depends on my personal brand. If I admit I lied about something that fundamental, then you'll have to rebuild, Linda said simply. The same way I had to rebuild my heart after watching my son erase me from his life. She walked toward the door, then turned back. I'm not asking you to destroy your career, Marcus. I'm asking you to build it on truth instead of lies. I'm asking you to be the man I raised you to be, not the image you think you need to be. Linda opened the door. You have a choice to make. You can keep the story that makes you look good, or you can tell the truth that makes you look human. You can keep the career built on erasing me, or you can build something new that includes the people who actually supported you. She paused. But you can't have both. You can't have a relationship with me while publicly pretending I don't exist. You can't benefit from my love while denying it exists. Linda walked out of the hospital room, leaving Marcus alone with the envelopes and the weight of his choice. 3 hours later, Marcus sat in his car in the hospital parking lot, reading his mother's letter by the overhead light. It was 12 pages long, written in her careful handwriting. It contained 28 years of memories, his first steps, his first words, his first day of school, his first heartbreak, his first business idea, his first success. It was the story of a mother's love, told through 1,000 small moments that had been erased from his version of events. At the end, she'd written, I don't need you to be perfect, Marcus. I never did. I just need you to be real. I need you to remember that your success doesn't exist in a vacuum. It was built on the foundation of love and support that many people provided. I was just one of them, but I was the most important one, and I deserved better than to be written out of the story I helped create. The choice is yours now. You can be the self-made man you pretended to be, or you can be the loved and supported man you actually are, but you can't be both. I will always love you, but I will no longer accept being invisible in your life. Choose wisely. Marcus sat in that parking lot until dawn, thinking about the man he'd become and the boy he used to be, thinking about the price of success and the cost of lies, thinking about his mother alone in her apartment, wondering if she'd raised a son or a stranger when the sun came up. Marcus made his choice. He drove home, opened his laptop, and began making phone calls. 6 months later, Linda Martinez was making dinner in her kitchen when her phone buzzed with a notification. Marcus had tagged her in a social media post. She opened it to find a video of him standing in front of his office building, speaking directly to the camera. 6 months ago, I went viral for telling a story about my success. It was a compelling story. It was also a lie. Linda sat down at her kitchen table, her heart pounding. I claimed I came from nothing, that I had no support, that I raised myself. The truth is, I was raised by the strongest, most loving woman I've ever known. My mother, Linda Martinez, worked double shifts for 15 years to give me opportunities. She sacrificed her own dreams so I could chase mine. She supported me through every failure and celebrated every success. The video had already gained thousands of views in the hour since he'd posted it. I erased her from my story because I thought being self-made sounded better than being loved and supported. I was wrong. Being loved and supported is actually much harder to earn than being self-made. It requires you to be worthy of someone else's sacrifice. Linda's eyes filled with tears, but they were different tears than she'd shed 6 months ago. I built my success on a foundation that my mother provided. Then I took credit for laying that foundation myself. That wasn't just dishonest. It was cruel. It was cruel to the woman who deserved the most credit for who I am today. The comments were already pouring in, and Linda could see they were mixed. Some people were praising Marcus for his honesty. Others were calling him weak for giving in to family pressure. A few were angry at being deceived. I know some of you will lose respect for me after this video. I understand that. But I'd rather be respected for who I actually am than for who I pretended to be. And who I actually am is a man who was raised with tremendous love and support, who succeeded because someone believed in him before he believed in himself. Marcus looked directly into the camera. Mom, if you're watching this, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for erasing you from my story. I'm sorry for taking credit for your sacrifices. I'm sorry for making you invisible when you deserved to be celebrated. I'm sorry it took losing you to remember who I really am. He paused, and Linda could see he was fighting back tears. To everyone else watching, I want you to think about the people who supported your dreams before anyone else believed in them. The people who sacrificed so you could succeed. Don't make my mistake. Don't erase them from your story to make yourself look better. Success shared with the people who helped you achieve it is so much sweeter than success claimed alone. The video ended with Marcus holding up the framed graduation photo, the one Linda had taken from his apartment 6 months ago. This picture was taken the day I graduated college. My mom wrote on the back, "Thanks for everything. Mom, I couldn't have done this without you." That was true then, and it's true now. I couldn't have done any of this without her. I'm just sorry it took me so long to remember that. Linda's phone rang immediately. It was Marcus this time, she answered. Did you see it? He asked, his voice uncertain. I saw it, and Linda looked around her kitchen, the same kitchen where she'd packed his lunches, helped him with homework, and watched him grow from a boy into a man. The walls were covered with photos again, but now they included recent pictures of them together. Over the past 6 months, they'd slowly rebuilt their relationship, step by careful step. I'm proud of you, she said simply. Really? That took courage. I lost 3 sponsorship deals before the video even finished uploading, Marcus said with a shaky laugh. My publicist is furious. My business partner thinks I've lost my mind. And how do you feel about that? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Lighter, he said finally. I feel lighter than I have in years. Linda smiled. Good. The truth usually feels that way, Mom. Yes. Can I come over for dinner this week? I'll bring groceries. Real groceries this time, not just wine and dessert. Linda laughed. Over the past 6 months, Marcus had been learning to be a real adult, paying his own bills, managing his own responsibilities, cooking his own meals. It had been an adjustment, but he'd done it. More importantly, he'd learned to see her as a person with her own needs and feelings, not just a resource to be utilized. I'd like that, Linda said. But I'm cooking. It's my turn. Are you sure? I've gotten pretty good at meal prep. I could make that chicken dish you taught me, Marcus. Yeah. Shut up and let your mother cook for you. She could hear him smiling through the phone. Yes, ma'am. After they hung up, Linda sat in her kitchen for a long time, thinking about the journey that had brought them here. The past 6 months hadn't been easy. There had been awkward conversations, hurt feelings that needed healing, and new boundaries. That needed establishing. Marcus had done the work, though. He'd not only corrected his public narrative, but had also made concrete changes in his life. He'd started therapy to understand why he'd felt the need to erase her from his story. He'd joined a support group for adult children learning to have healthier relationships with their parents. He'd even started volunteering at a literacy program, working with single mothers to help their children with reading, a way of giving back that honored what Linda had given him. Most importantly, he'd learned to see her not as an extension of himself, but as a complete person who had her own dreams, struggles, and worth beyond her role as his mother. Linda's phone buzzed with a text from Carol. Saw the video. Told you that boy was still in there somewhere. Then another from Mrs. Patterson. That grandson of yours just restored my faith in young people. And dozens more from friends, coworkers, and even strangers who had somehow found her contact information. But the message that meant the most came an hour later, from Marcus. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for showing me what nothing really meant, so I could learn to value what I actually had. I love you, Mom, Linda typed back. I love you too, Mijo. Welcome home. That evening, Linda sat on her couch with a cup of tea, looking at the photos on her walls. They told a different story now, not just the story of a son's achievements, but the story of a relationship that had survived its greatest test. On her coffee table sat a copy of Marcus's new book, which he'd just finished writing. It was called Built on Love: How My Mother's Sacrifice Created My Success. The dedication read, To Linda Martinez, who taught me that being self-made is nothing compared to being well-loved. The book was being published by a smaller press, not one of the major publishers who had been interested in his original self-made story. His speaking fees had dropped significantly since his public confession. His social media following had decreased as some people lost interest in his more nuanced, less sensational narrative, but other opportunities had emerged. He'd been invited to speak at conferences about authentic leadership and family relationships. A producer was interested in developing his real story into a documentary about parent-child relationships and the cost of success. Most importantly, his business had stabilized with clients who valued authenticity over image. Marcus had learned that success built on truth was more sustainable than success built on lies, even if it was harder to achieve. Linda picked up the book and opened it. The first chapter, which began, I used to tell people I came from nothing. It was a lie that made me feel powerful and self-sufficient. The truth is, I came from everything that matters: unconditional love, unwavering support, and sacrificial devotion. This is the story of how I almost lost everything by pretending. I came from nothing, and how my mother saved me by showing me what nothing actually looks like. Linda smiled and continued reading. Her son had finally learned to tell the truth. And the truth, it turned out, was a much better story than the lie had ever been. Outside, the Denver autumn evening was crisp and clear. Linda's small apartment felt warm and full of possibility. Tomorrow, Marcus would come for dinner, and they would continue the slow, precious work of being a family, not the perfect family from his original narrative, nor the dysfunctional family from his lies, but a real family, with real love and real challenges and real hope for the future. In the end, that was worth more than any viral video or inspiring story. It was worth everything.